Zosoz Zyw Xzk Zosoz vizgl vhgz. If we want to look and see about Zionism from the biblical standpoint, people would generally not point us to the 169 mentions of Zion or 171 of Sion, spelling with the S. Sion means basically a landmark, a shining example. And so that's what we're going to be talking about for a sense. But the first one that I would like to, there's two verses that people mention most of all, I think. Now there's some other ones that don't mention those terms, but Isaiah 40, verse 1, is kind of misrendered, right? Isaiah is a figure who really lays down the point that the land of Israel and the even Jerusalem itself doesn't have to be included in, the Zion. But verse 1 is Nechmu Ami Yamar Al-Hikam. So Nechem, regret, wa, and Nechmu, repent, Ami, and you'll be my people, says your God. So it's conditional. It's conditional. And another one, which again doesn't take it about any particular sect or something that people quote, is Genesis 12, three. Wabraka Mub Rakik Wum Kaluk R One Berku Buk Kul Mush Pachet Hatma. I will bless those who bless you and curse them that curse you. And of all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Which is interesting, right? So who spends more time blessing Abraham? The Muslimin. 11 times a day, they're sitting down saying, blessing upon Abraham and his progeny, those sorts of benedictions. Not really the progeny entirely, but the spiritual lineage, you could say, that relates to. Their word of the people of the house is a little bit different. So that's different. It's, again, not some sort of thing based on ancestry or some label that a person has. Now, we are looking at the ruins of Capernaum, and it comes from the Hebrew Bar Nahum, which means Nahum's village. And Luke 7, 1 through 10 mentions this. So does Mark 1, 21 through 34, Luke 4, 38 to 41. And the early Christian community considered the area very important. Now, the picture that you see here is of a place that's, a few centuries later than when the Christians say Jesus was. But one of the things that you do come across is that, the idea is that there's ruins underneath there. And how far back some of these ruins go, it's hard to say. But basically, so there's a righteousness and carrying on a righteous lineage is what we're talking about. And let's say the chant again. Zosoz, Zyw Xzk, Zosoz, vizgl, vhgz. And so you may have heard that perhaps the biblical use of the term Zion and stuff doesn't really apply to what we're talking here. So there's some stuff here to show you a contrast to probably what could be said to be Jewish Zionism versus the Zionism of Torah. And we could look at that interview on 60 Minutes back from 1988 and George Soros. Certain secular implications. And well, I guess we could start there with the secular stuff. Heilbrunn of the Committee for Re-election of General Shlomo Lahat, the mayor of Tel Aviv, said in October 1983 that we have to kill all the Palestinians unless they are resigned to live here as slaves. Which, hey, they were there first. They weren't the invaders from the north. Thank you very much. Yoram Parath, according to the Yediot Ahronot of July 14th, 1972, it is the duty of Israeli leaders to explain to public opinion clearly and courageously a certain number of facts that are forgotten with time. The first of these is that there is no Zionism, colonialization, or Jewish state without the eviction of the Arabs and the expropriation of their lands. Now, I myself am going to point out very clearly that I absolutely do not believe in wars of conquest. So Rabbi Yaakov Perrin said, according to the New York Times of February 28th, 1994, 1 million Arabs are not worth a Jewish fingernail. Again, why don't beliefs and deeds matter rather than some sort of label? And remember, the George Soros and the other people that people say, oh, conspiracy theory. They're not talking against the Jews per se. They're talking about secularists that are considered Jews because of hereditary or some other or cultural reasons or something. The Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon spoke to Shimon Peres on October 3rd, 2001, and said, every time we do something, you tell me America will do this and will do that. I want to tell you something very clear. Don't worry about American pressure on Israel. We, the Jewish people, control America. Americans know it. And, well, I would say the same people control both, because I don't think it's per se the Jews. I think it's, certain ruling families. And one of the one of these 13 richest families in the world isn't Jewish. So, it transcends that label. Theodor Herzl, in his June 12th, 1895 entry in his diary, said, "Spirit the penniless population across the frontier by denying it employment. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly." And remember that the Zionist thing started a little bit before him, and it was basically a Christian thing. They wanted the Jews out of their land. So, people saying, "Oh, Judaism and whatever." But we'll get to that later. Ariel Sharon said before the Somet Party, according to the Agent France Press, the Agent's French Press of November 15th, 1988, "Everybody has to move, run, and grab as many hilltops as they can to enlarge the settlements, because everything we take now will stay ours. Everything we don't grab will go to them." And we have David Ben-Gurion said in 1948, because originally the Palestinian was a label put on in like the 30s. And the Jews were the first ones to generally take up the Palestinian thing, because people generally knew 100 years ago that Palestine was an old Jewish insult that the Romans, to insult their conquered people, called the land Palestine. So, But anyways, he said, "We must do everything to ensure that they, the Palestinians, never return," assuring his fellow Zionists that Palestinians will never come back to their homes. The old will die and the young will forget. I don't think they forgot. And we see in certain places, whether you're talking about something that a particular people was responsible for or not, you're going to see certain things associated with that. That people don't forget. The message of injustices that were done will be used at least for excuses, if not to actually do things for a long time. Joseph Weitz, the head of the Jewish Agency's colonization department from Israel, an apartheid state, by Uri Davis, is where you find the reference of this. "There are some who believe that the non-Jewish population, even in a high percentage within our borders, will be more effectively under our surveillance, and there are some who believe the contrary, i.e. that it's easier to carry out surveillance over the activities of a neighbor than over those of a tenant. I tend to support the latter view and have an additional argument: the need to sustain the character of the state, of which will henceforth be Jewish, with the non-Jewish minority limited to 15%. I had already reached this fundamental position as early as 1940, and it has entered into my diary." And Raphael Eitan, the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, Yedidot Ahronot of April 13th, 1983 reports, "We declare openly that the Arabs have no right to settle on even 1 centimeter of Eretz Israel." Well, they've been there since before even the tribe of Israel, but some of them, but "Force is all they do or ever will understand. We shall use the ultimate force until the Palestinians come crawling to us on all fours." And as I said, I do not believe in wars of conquest. Rabin described the conquest of Lydda after the completion of Plan Dalet. And he said, "We shall reduce the Arab population to a community of woodcutters and waiters." David Ben-Gurion wrote in his July 18th, 1948 diary, "We must do everything to ensure they never do return." Yitzhak Rabin, according to the October 23rd New York Times in 1979, said, "We walked outside Ben-Gurion accompanying verses accompanying us. Alon repeated his question, what is to be done with the Palestinian population? Ben Gurion waved his hand in a gesture which said, drive them out. And David Ben Gurion said in May 1948, we should prepare to go over the defense with the aim of smashing Lebanon, Transjordan, and Syria. And, nowadays, who was that spokesman that was on the news that said their goal is to conquer Iran and Syria and Jordan and I don't remember the whole list. The weak point in the Arab coalition is Lebanon, for the Muslim regime is artificial and easy to undermine. It wasn't a real Islamic state and people knew it. A Christian state should be established. When we smash the Arab legions, strengthen and bomb Amman, I do not support bombing of civilian populations under any circumstance whatsoever, regardless of what side's doing it. That's just not right. We will eliminate Transjordan too, and then Syria will fall. If Egypt still dares to fight on, we shall bomb Port Said, Alexandria, and Cairo. And Moshe Dayan said to the Technion, according to the Haaretz of Haifa, April 4th, 1969, Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You do not even know the names of these Arab villages, and I do not blame you because geography books no longer exist. Not only do the books not exist, the Arab villages are not there either. Nahlal arose in the place of Mahlul, Kibbutz Gabat in the place of Jibta, Kibbutz Sarid in the place of Hunaythis, and Kafar Yeshua in the place of Tal al-Shuman. There was not a single place built in this country that did not have a former Arab population. And Israel Koenig said in his memorandum that we must use terror, assassination, intimidation, land confiscation, and the cutting of all social services to rid the Galilee of its Arab population. And I'm dead serious about my disclaimer on my channel that I'm not inciting crime or anything like that. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of the state of Israel, said, you can help us or we will overthrow the world. And the Israeli general, Matityahu Peled, according to Haaretz of March 19, 1972, said the thesis that the danger of genocide was hanging over us in June 1967, and that Israel is fighting for its physical existence is only bluff, which was born and developed after the war. The Israel president, Moshe Katsav, according to the Jerusalem Post of May 10th, 2001, said, there's a huge gap between us and our enemies, not just in ability, but in morality, culture, sanctity of life, and conscience. They are our neighbors here, but it seems as if at a distance of a few hundred meters away, there are actually people who do not belong to our continent, our world, but actually belong to a different galaxy. Raphael Eitan said, according to the New York Times of April 14th, 1983, we will have to settle the land like all the Arabs will be about to do about it. Will be to scurry around like drug cockroaches in a bottle. Ehud Barak, Prime Minister of Israel, said on August 28th, 2000, the Palestinians are like crocodiles. The more you give them meat, they want more. And Yitzhak Shamar said, the Prime Minister of Israel said to some settlers, according to April 1st, 1988's New York Times, the Palestinians would be crushed like grasshoppers, heads smashed against boulders and walls. Menahem begin, said the Knesset, according to the New Statesman, June 25th, 1982. They are beasts walking on two legs. Now, yeah, this insult and the, dehumanizing people, so it's not, if people believe or do something wrong, perhaps you can say something about it, but this sort of thing, sorry about the chair sounds here. David Ben-Gurion, according to the Jewish Paradox, page 121, says, if I were an Arab leader, I would never sign an agreement with Israel. It is normal. We have taken their country. It is true God promised it to us. Well, genetics kind of prove that 95% of Jews have no Semitic ancestry, really. But how could that interest them? Our God is not theirs. There has been anti-Semitism. Well, anti-Semitism is really the northwestern people of Africa, the people south of Turkey and stuff like this, brown skin, black woolly hair, they're not white people from the north, the Nazis, which was a slur by the Bolsheviks, but Hitler, Auschwitz, but was that their fault? They see but one thing. We have come and we have stolen their country. Why would they accept that? So, there's a lot of agents, whatever. And so, do we say that this started in secularism? Certain elements of it, at least the Jewish identity, as an inherent, whatever, certainly existed beforehand. Menahoth 43b and 44a talks about an obligation for a Jewish man to say every day, thank you, God, for not making me a Gentile, a woman, or a slave. And if it's Goyim, come on. People aren't turning their back on God just because they haven't listed themselves under some sort of, ethnic title. And one of the things that Jesus definitely would have worked against, you could say, was this where is it? But anyways, Erubin 21b talks about if anybody disobeys the rabbis, they deserve death and should be punished by boiling hot excrement in hell. Does it talk that severely about disobeying God? It Sanhedrin 58b talks about how if a boy hits a Jew, the Gentile should be killed. Well, equal sort of thing, right? Eye for an eye, is that okay? But why not that? Sanhedrin 57a mentions that a Jew need not pay a Gentile. Kuthian, the wages owed for the work. I would support fair wages for everybody. And Baba Kama's 37b again removes the liability for an Israelite or someone who calls themselves an Israelite. If you want to talk pre the modern state of Israel, but there's to be a full payment the other way around. Baba Mezia 24a talks about how if a Jew finds a lost item, if it's not somebody who is a Jew, it doesn't have to be returned. And Sanhedrin 76a says that God won't spare a Jew who marries his daughter to an old man or takes a wife for his infant son or returns a lost article to a Cuthian. And Baba Kama 37b talks about how the people who aren't listed as Jews are outside the protection of the law, and their money is exposed to those who consider themselves of Israel. And there's no death penalty for a Jew killing a non-Jew in Sanhedrin 57a. And there's lying to non-Jews, according to Baba Kama 113a, and non-Jewish children. Other faiths say that if you haven't hit puberty, you're innocent. But no, Avodah Zarah 21a and 22 to 22b talks about, they claim that those who are Gentiles are going to prefer having sex with cows rather than humans. Well, I mean, in America, you know the slang, but other than and some people prefer, you know, big women. That's fine. But no, that's not right. It's not acceptable. Just because there's not a death penalty like there is in Torah doesn't mean that people find that acceptable amongst that. The first death penalties in America weren't for, but maybe they are for what you expect. But Avodah Zarah 36b says that from the females that are born to people who are considered Gentiles are filthy from their very birth. Yabamath 98a talks about saying that Gentile children are animals. Now, a lot of, you know, and of course there was there was stuff made up about Jesus after Christianity took off. There was stuff talk about the Shabbat 116a encourages the destruction of the Christian books. And Sanhedrin 90a says that those who read the Christian books as if they're spiritual authorities won't have any state in the, you know, next world. And the Christians and those who reject the Talmud will go to hell and be punished for all generations, according to Rosh Hashanah 17a. And okay, with that, I mean, you know, what about those who follow the good and truth that is in Tanakh, that's in maybe the side books that weren't included, that maybe are just as authoritative? And you know, so okay, there's other things that can be said, but we need to be we need to take heed and be careful of how we treat those who aren't of our groups. We can perhaps join them in some ways or another in confirming good and truth. Now, do we have to marry people of whatever group? No, that's not necessary, because certainly marriage is a religious thing, so certain preference would be to that point. Criticizing people because of their heredity, of their nationality, absolutely do not support that. There's some other verses that could be brought up here that would drive the point home that the shining example that we're supposed to be are, maybe there's an example, and are you God's people? Are you not God's people because you stepped aside from what the example should be? You know, so many of these things are conditional, and let's never forget that. Zosoz Zyw Xzk. Zosoz, vizgl, vhgz. And another way to say that, Zosoz, Zyw Xzk, Zosoz, vizgl, vhgz.